The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent. This program is intended for educational purposes.
You're listening to
आप सुन रहे हैं
तुम सुनो था
ನೀವು ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ
Radio Azim Premji University.
Have you ever wondered how did Pani Puri come about? Or what goes into the making of a cotton kurta? Or a mobile phone? Or maybe a prescription medication? In this series, Story of, we will explore the stories behind everyday objects, whether it is food items, the clothes we wear, or the mobiles we use. In every episode, we will start with an everyday object and dig deeper into it. Maybe talk about the migrant workers who prepare and sell our food, farmers who grow cotton for our kurtas, or how gold is mined and the people who mine it. I hope to take you on this journey with me, where we will invite guests who can help us find the story behind these everyday objects. And if we ask the right questions, we might learn many interesting things. Hi, my name is Richa Govil and I'm a faculty member in the School of Development at Azim Premji University. This is Story of Pani Puri on Radio Azim Premji University.
Episode 1 Pani Puri.
गोल गप्पे वाला
गोल गप्पे
गुपचुप पानी के बताशे ये सब
फुल्की
गोलगप्पा पानी पूरी
When I say the words Pani Puri, what comes to your mind? I'm sure you are imagining a vendor on some street, maybe a street close to your home. I'm sure you are imagining this big matka full of this delicious pani. And usually they have these plastic bags full of puris, and then they will have this pot full of aloo and the masala that they put in the puri. Perhaps more than one type of water that they will serve with it. And I'm sure you imagine a setting where there are multiple people holding out those leaf cups for their turn when they will be served the next puri. And the mouth-watering crunch as that goes into your mouth.
मजा आ गया फैंटास्टिक मजा आ गया जबरदस्त
Whether you call it a Golgappa, Pani Puri, Pani ke batashe, phulki, puchka, or any other name, it's India's favorite street food. There are many origin stories. One places the origin of Pani Puri in the kingdom of Magad, in what is now Patna in Bihar, that region generally. By some accounts, the puri used to be smaller and crisper, but the filling was some variant of aloo, which is more or less what we find everywhere in the country today. There are many, many variants, right? One can have a puri that's made of suji or maida. Some people like plain aloo. Some places you will find aloo mixed with onions. Other places you will have matar, or you would have chana, and the healthy variants which will have variations of moong. In upscale restaurants, it's even served in very innovative ways. I was at a party once where the pani was served in a shot glass, and on top of that was placed the dry puri with the usual fillings in it. It was tasty, but I have to say not as tasty as our usual street vendors. I remember the story from when I was a kid. My chacha would, often want to take us out for chaat. And my parents would always refuse because they felt that it was unhygienic, because our chaatwala, or the one closest to our home, would always put his thela next to this big open nala. So he would always advertise, my chacha would always say, whenever my parents would complain that it was unhygienic, he would say, Jo maja वो नाले के बगल वाले ठेले से पानी पूरी खाने में आता है, वो और कहीं नहीं आएगा, right? And that was his sales pitch. And he was absolutely right. But there have been many changes since those days. Usually these days we find Pani Puri vendors advertising that the water that they use is very hygienic. They often wear plastic gloves even when serving the Pani Puri. Things look different. But have you wondered who are these people who day after day stand at the same corner at the same times serving us our favorite snack? Sometimes we see the same person for years on end at the same corner selling Pani Puri. Sometimes we see the location remains the same, but the person changes over short durations. Have you ever wondered, do the people who sell Pani Puri, do they make the ingredients themselves? Do they get it from somewhere? Do they make money? And also, who are they? Where they come from? Are they locals usually? Do they come from somewhere else? What are their lives like? How do they think about Pani Puri?
Hi, I am Puja Guha, faculty at the Azim Premji University, and I'm interested in looking at informal labor, people who work in vulnerable conditions, especially in the urban areas. Being a migrant myself, the issues concerning migrants from various strata of the society has always been concerning me. And hence, I have a decade-long research done on migrants from different parts of the country. In fact, very recently, I've been studying migrants, especially the youth migrants who move from Chhattisgarh to southern states, trying to understand their aspirations and their desires.
And Puja, you have studied street vendors. Can you tell us more about them?
So we studied Pani Puri vendors during and before the pandemic, in fact. So talking about the Pani Puri vendors, what we often find on the corners of the street, as you may have noticed, are these very young fellows, mostly men, standing at the same place as you said and vending for, let's just say, half a day and serving multiple customers. So yes, you're right. We also wondered, where did they come from? What is their background? And they look very young. What are they doing there? So we, in fact, interacted with many Pani Puri vendors around Bangalore. And interestingly, we found all of them to be migrants. And all of them claimed to come from a particular state, which is Uttar Pradesh.
मिर्जापुर से यूपी उत्तर प्रदेश
मैं इलाहाबाद डिस्ट्रिक्ट से हूँ
यूपी उत्तर प्रदेश और ये जिला इटावा जिला कानपुर जिला से ऐसे लोग हैं
These migrants from Uttar Pradesh, they have come to Bangalore. They don't speak our language. They don't speak Kannada. They speak their own language. And now they have created a space for themselves with the language of food, which is Pani Puri. Isn't that interesting? Food as a language. And that is what we see in most of the food vendors' case. Food as a culture is getting introduced in this larger city space of Bangalore, and these migrants are using food to create a space for themselves. But interestingly, how you modify or customize the existing food of Bangalore. Let me give you another interesting fact about our very own Namma dosa. The 99 variety dosa stall that we may have come across at various food streets, where does that come from? Again, interestingly, a person from Hassan actually went to Mumbai to vend dosa. And his dosa did not quite work there. So he had to customize it to suit to the Mumbaikars. What did he do? He made a pav bhaji dosa. He just put the bhaji inside dosa and he sold it. And that was a hit. He thought, if it's working in Mumbai, why can't it work in Bangalore? Chalo, Bangalore mein bhi try karte hain. So when he got it back to Bangalore, it was not just pav bhaji dosa, but anything you name, you will get in as a filling in dosa. Starting from Chinese to noodles to pasta, everything. And that was a great hit. And this was a person who started this cart, its food stall in Koramangala. And that was adapted by many cart vendors at different locations. So this tells us how new food and also the existing food gets customized based on the needs and requirement and of course the taste of the customers in a particular city. But at the same time, it's becoming a very discernible part of the city's culture and space.
So that's very interesting, right? You've talked about Pani Puri, you've talked about the many different varieties of dosa and many other street foods. I'm sure you would have come across people selling momos, which are also very popular in Bangalore. But I want to go back to the question we were discussing earlier, right? So who are these people who are providing us some of our favorite foods? Where do they come from? And, even as a migrant, as they decide that, okay, I want to go to Bangalore and do something, why vending of food? What gets them interested in that particular trade?
Now, there is an interesting story there as well. Who doesn't want to experience city life? People living in villages, maybe very small towns, Bangalore for them is an aspiration. They want to be there in that city. It is happening. Now, how do they get there? Or what do they do once they land here? Now, food vending is a very easy way of them getting into a livelihood, which doesn't really require much of a skill. And often they are working for someone. Let's go back to Pani Puri vendors. These youngsters, 17, 18 years old, right? They should be doing their college or maybe high school.
12 साल से कर रहे हैं, 22 साल का तभी से 10 साल से आगे बेंगलोर में।
हाँ, यही अच्छा लगता है, यहाँ का मौसम भी अच्छा है, बस पानी पूरी में दिलचस्पी हो गया तो।
But they are there, standing on the road and vending. You go and ask them and they give a very interesting reason. They say, "Ma'am, हमको तो ये शहर देखना था, हम तो घूमने आए हैं यहाँ पे." So you ask them, "But you're working." They'll say that, हाँ, ये चाचा का दुकान है, 4-5 महीने रहेंगे, फिर चले जाएंगे. हमको तो ये शहर देखना था. So constantly they will say that they want to experience this city life. And that is what these youth want. Their aspirations of living a city dream. Often they don't own a stall. In fact, we have not met even a single Pani Puri boy who owns the stall. They often work for an employee who is probably their distant relative or maybe some kins from their own village. And they are hired, these boys are hired on a short-term contract, usually for 6 months, to sell and they get a commission. So these youth, they try it out for 6-8 months and then they decide whether to go back or to stick around. But honestly speaking, we have not come across even a single youth who said that he wants to go back.
12 साल हो गया, 14 years हो गया मुझे पानी पूरी काम करते हुए बेंगलुरु में ही।
ये सर 10-15 साल हो गया है, बेंगलोर में ही रहते हैं।
So it is very interesting to see, how these vendors who are migrants, who've migrated here 20, 30 years back, are still continuing in the same profession intergenerationally. So why city life? What do they mean by city life? Now, the vendors whom we have spoken to, and we have asked them कि आपको इस शहर में क्या मिलता है? क्यों रहते हैं इस शहर में? ये शहर इतना महंगा है, इतनी गाड़ियाँ हैं. So the one thing that they've constantly said is बच्चों की पढ़ाई. They actually somehow value the education here more, and also because they think of English education. They say that यहाँ पे अंग्रेजी में पढ़ाई करते हैं. मेरे गांव में अंग्रेजी नहीं सिखाते हैं. मेरे बच्चे अगर यहाँ रहें तो उनको अंग्रेजी आ जाएगी. So this English speaking population and also the kind of glamour that city has to offer. Maybe they have not seen that in their childhood, but they want their children to acquire it. During the pandemic, when we were going and visiting these vendors at their homes because they had closed their carts and they were sitting at home, we asked them कि आप गांव क्यों नहीं चले जाते? They all said, बच्चों की पढ़ाई है मैडम, जो भी है यहाँ पे ऑनलाइन क्लासेस हो रही हैं. घर चले जाएंगे तो वहाँ इंटरनेट की सुविधा नहीं है. It is a constant tussle that they have. They want a life not just for themselves, but actually for their children. The other thing that they have found is the relationship that they build with their customers. This also became very evident during the pandemic when we met them and asked them कि आपको सरकार से कोई भी सुविधा मिल रही है? Everyone said, हम लोग यहाँ के हैं ही नहीं तो सरकार हमारी क्यों सुनेगी? So we are wondering, how are you still sustaining? And many of them very interestingly said, हमारे साहब है ना, वो हमारे ठेले पे खाना खाते थे. हाँ, उन्होंने सहायता की, मेरे बच्चों की पढ़ाई उन्होंने अभी तक जारी रखी है. So you can see the amount of social capital that these people build over the period of years that they've been around with the people around them. It transcends the class and the caste barriers, which is very interesting to see. It's also reflected in the way that they speak to us. They have a sense of confidence about their future in the city.
भाई, हिंदुस्तान भर को घूमने के कई तरीके हैं. जिंदगी के कुछ साल निकालिए, पैसे इकट्ठे कीजिए, या यहीं अजीम प्रेमजी यूनिवर्सिटी पे मेरे साथ चलिए, मैं घुमा लाता हूँ. बंधु, हमने आपके लिए एक नई गाड़ी तैयार की है जिसका नाम है
हिंदुस्तान की नई गीतमाला, हिंदुस्तान की नई गीतमाला.
26 नवंबर को सिर्फ रेडियो अजीम प्रेमजी यूनिवर्सिटी पर.
It is interesting to hear that many of them have this confidence about their future in the city. But I'm also wondering about another thing, right? Especially for most street vendors, they will set up their cart or stand at some particular location. So how do they know where to set that up? Do they need permissions of the shop next to which they are setting up? And also, is that something that they can rely on? Day after day, month after month. How does that work?
So far, we have not come across any authority which decides whose space is it. Rather, the vendors themselves decide, they collaborate, they coordinate, they coerce, and eventually they come to a conclusion that one particular space, it is probably 2 by 2 space for one particular cart, and that cart remains stationed in that space for the entire day throughout the night as well. So we came across this litti choka vendor called Sunil from Bihar. He had a semi-permanent job in a factory. He resigned from that and he thought that he has to start something on his own, a business, an enterprise. And guess what? He decided to sell litti choka because he thought that he is great in making litti choka in his village and he should be doing it here as well. So we asked, weren't you scared? Weren't you afraid that enough customers wouldn't come? What he said was that this area where I am vending, I know that there are many Biharis. तो लोग तो आ जाएंगे. The only struggle was कि मुझे यहाँ जगह कैसे मिलेगी. So then he started talking to the other vendors in that space and somehow he squeezed in a little bit space for himself and the cart, and since then he's been vending litti chokha in the same location. Now it has been close to 5 years and he's doing pretty well. He's got these customers who come from distant parts of the city to have litti chokha from him, which is an amazing feat, I must say.
When we think about street vendors, right, and street food vendors in particular, we imagine the kinds of carts you're talking about, people setting up a stool and starting selling pani puri and all other kinds of ways of selling food on the streets. The one thing that often comes up is the nature of the street, right? And that changes. And that's why we often see these cities and neighborhoods engaging in these street cleanup drives. And that is where many of these vendors get evicted. So did you come across any such situations?
Oh, well, yes. In our 2 years of research, we came across this big eviction drive that happened in one of the very prominent food streets of Bangalore. I'm not sure whether you are aware, 18th cross of HSR was known to be the food street for last 20-25 years. And that was the reason why we chose that for our research. One fine morning, we woke up to the news that there has been some eviction drive on the 18th cross. We were surprised, we were taken aback. We immediately rushed to the street because we have been there, we knew all the vendors there. And to our surprise, out of those 50, no one was there. We waited for the whole day because we wanted to meet those vendors. Koi to aayega. No one came. Finally, we called up a few and we went to their homes to find out what happened. And you know what happened? The last night, they were said that they have to evict. They have to remove their carts. And the same carts which have been parked there for last so many years, they had to remove them overnight. The next day morning, bulldozers came and they said that if they don't evict by noon, then the bulldozer is going to clear up the whole street. We were surprised. We said that, didn't you ask why? They said that, we did, madam. But they just said that there is some cleanup drive which is happening. यहाँ पे शायद कुछ रोड बनेगा या नाला बनेगा. We were not happy with this. So we went ahead and asked the authorities what happened, why this sudden eviction. What we were told was a very different reason. We were told that they had to do it, they have to close all the street food carts because there was an apparent cholera outbreak in Bangalore. And the food carts were considered as spreading this deadly disease. We were wondering, what is the evidence? Why them?
But wouldn't the Street Vendors Act protect them in some way?
So unfortunately, the act is yet not implemented in the city. Had it been there, the vendors may not have to face this. But there are several problems with the implementation of the act. But I must tell you one thing here. India is the only country which has an act like this, Protection for Street Vendors Act, which entails that no street vendor can be evicted without giving proper notice and proper reason. And also, in any case if they are evicted, their livelihoods needs to be secured. They have to be given a proper and alternative space of vending. So this is an act which gives private rights to public space. Just imagine what it means. Footpath, it belongs to all of us. But the government is saying that a vendor who has a vending cart and is recognized by the government can use that footpath for his or her own livelihood purpose, to earn a livelihood. Which means that at that moment in time when he is vending, I cannot use that part of the footpath.
So this is interesting, right? Because when you talk about a private use of public space, right? And I think about the context of streets, which is what we are discussing. We do that all the time with our vehicles, right? So if I'm driving a car and I park it on the street, I have also occupied that public space for my vehicle. So how is this different?
That is where the interesting part about this act is. Why this act is particularly given to the street food vendors or street vendors in general. Why does street vendors have this luxury that they can park their cart and also make money out of it, while people who want that space to park their own vehicles do not? Here we have to also understand the vulnerability and precarity of this informal labor, vendors. So they have a livelihood and we have to protect their livelihood. Now, by protecting their livelihood, what they require is space. Space is integral for these kind of people or this kind of livelihood. So the government or the act ensures that they get their space so that they're able to carry on with their livelihood.
So what you're saying is that this act is designed to protect the livelihood of populations which are vulnerable, right? And that is why the act is imagined and designed in a way that it gives them some rights, enforceable rights over public spaces.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you had said earlier that we are the only country in the world which has such an act. And if I remember correctly, this was passed in 2014, right? So how did this come about? What was the thinking behind it?
So this act has a long history. history goes back to the constant contestation that hawkers and vendors have been having with the city dwellers. Whose space is it? It's not a new question. It's been asked forever. So there's this constant thing about, is the footpath for the pedestrians or is the footpath for the hawkers? And this contestation has happened in every big city in India, Delhi, Calcutta, Mumbai, everywhere. So the act came about as a push from the associations of various vendors in large cities like Delhi, Gujarat, Ahmedabad, Mumbai. Why it is remarkable is that the state now identifies these vendors as legal entities. They are not illegal encroachers. And they are giving them the legal space to vend. Having said that, the Act also regulates these spaces, which means a vendor cannot vend anywhere and everywhere. There would be certain regulated spaces, regulated streets, which will be the vending zones, and those were the places where the vendors would be putting up their carts.
And they have to register somewhere for this?
Yes. And vendors also need to register themselves as vendors with the authorities.
So what I find fascinating about this is, as you said, right, we are the only country which has such an act which gives these spaces, designated spaces, to vulnerable communities for their livelihoods purposes. Yet, at the same time, all our cities are growing, and even the newer areas of cities are not designed keeping in mind street vendors, right? We Indians love our street food. We can't imagine a city without street food. Yet, when we design neighborhoods, there is no space for them. So they have to be on the footpath. Therefore, by design creating this conflict between people who need to use the footpath and people who need to use that space to vend food, which the footpath walkers are themselves going to eat.
I completely agree here. And that's the whole fight between the city dwellers and people from outside, let's just say. Whose city is it? When you're imagining the aesthetics of the city, where do I put in these street vendors? I should give you another example from my own work. When we were visiting some of these spots of vending, we came to a location which was mostly residential. It was somewhere near North Bangalore, Sanjay Nagar. It was near a park in the very residential area of Sanjay Nagar. So we asked the vendors that, how did you get a space here? Are the residents okay with you all vending here? And there were close to 30 vendors. They said that yes, the residents are fine. In fact, some of the residences are our regular customers. We go and deliver food to their house. Many old people live there, so they like our food. It was very nice to see that kind of amicability between the residents and the vendors. However, things drastically changed post-COVID. When we went to the same spot after the pandemic, what we saw was again a vacant spot and maybe one or two vendors there. We asked them what happened. So they said that, we were the first one to leave because everything was closed. When we tried to come back, the residents thought that if they allow us there on the street, we would be spreading the disease even more. So we were looked as carriers of the disease. So in fact, one person narrated, "Madam, जितनी सफाई हम लोग रखते हैं और जितना फ्रेश खाना हम लोग बनाते हैं, आप घर पे भी नहीं रखेंगे। आप लोग फ्रिज का इस्तेमाल करते हैं ना, लेकिन हम कोई खाना फ्रिज से निकाल के आपको नहीं देते। तो आप ही बताइए, हम इस बीमारी को कैसे फैलाएंगे?" लेकिन क्या करें, लोग जो मानते हैं वही मानेंगे. This was very disheartening because on one hand, the hotels were opening, the restaurants were operating. Why? Because they were considered as hygienic, whereas the food vendors were not allowed because they were operating on street. So you see, how much ever we say that we recognize them and we see their utility in the city, at the time of crisis, they are the ones who get affected the most.
So this kind of way of thinking about the food that they are serving ये सभी की सोच ऐसी थी कि कुछ ही की ऐसी थी?
यहाँ पे मैं एक और कहानी सुनाना चाहूंगी. There was a woman whom we met again on the 18th Cross HSR. Her name was Shantamma. You will not believe, but she has been vending there for last 40 years. HSR 18th Cross में last 30 सालों से, but उसके पहले वो वहीं आसपास एक और गली में अपना कार्ट चलाती थी. So when she actually got into the business, she was around 20, in her 20s, and she got into the business because she thought that she knows how to cook, and why not? She can have her own enterprise. But now she has a son whom she has married off, and the entire family is into this vending business. What was interesting about this woman was that the way she thought about her customers' nutrition. She used to say that I make sure that my customers get a full balanced meal. I would have dal with some vegetables. I will have a mixed veg curry. I will have rice and chapati. And she also had non-veg option. So ek din fish, ek din egg, different varieties. She said that we are responsible for our customers' health. If the customer falls sick by eating our food, he's never going to come back. So we have to ensure that he gets good food. At the same time, his nutritions are balanced. I mean, tell me, कौन से होटल वाले इस तरह से सोचते हैं?
So it's obvious to all of us that street food vendors provide a critical service to all of us who live in cities, whether they're selling pani puris, momos, or full meals. In this show about the story of Pani Puri, we started by discussing Pani Puri itself, the food. Then we discussed who are the people who are selling these Pani Puris to us. And we learned that many of them are migrants from different parts of the country who come to a city like Bangalore almost to try out what a city life could be. And many of them stay for years and years and build their lives here, have children, and many of them bring in their children, nieces and nephews into the same trade. Many of them, through this work, develop a sense of their role in the city as providers of affordable food, whether it's for regular needs or the occasional snack. Then we also got into some of the politics of public spaces in cities. So whose footpath is it anyway? Who should have a right to use that footpath or not? So you see, we started with something as simple as Pani Puri. And through that, we discussed some of the very complex issues that relate to urban migration, use of urban spaces, and even laws that govern the country. So through this discussion, I hope you start seeing objects that are all around us and start wondering about the stories behind them. And the next time you look at a Pani Puri, I hope that you see it differently. After your last bite, or perhaps before it, take a moment to say hello to the seller. Find out where they are from. Learn a little bit about who they are, what they are doing in the city, and what they hope to be. Thanks, Puja. That was great.
My pleasure.
And we'll see you all next time.
That was episode 1, Pani Puri. Make sure you check out the show notes where we share the show resources and acknowledgements. And don't forget to subscribe or like our channel for future episodes.
You're listening to
आप सुन रहे हैं
You're listening to सुनो था
न्यू केल्ता इदिरा
रे कथा सुन
Radio Azim Premji
University.